Hello, so we're a bit late, so we're gonna be moving fast. If I talk too fast, sorry about that, but that's the way I do this. So we're gonna talk about open source risks in the context of the CRA, Cyber Resilience Act, and NIS2, which is a critical infrastructure regulation. Why are we doing this and who are we? I'm Seb, I'm leading the OSPO at E.ON. I'm part of the E.ON Digital Technology, the IT department of E.ON.
Yeah, my name is Hauke. I'm a cybersecurity advisor at Intcube, a Berlin-based cybersecurity startup. We do a lot of consulting work also in the energy sector and the critical infrastructure sector. And Sebastian and I we know each other from working together at Golem, a leading German tech publication, where he covered open source and I covered security. And today we want to have a look how we can use maybe some methods also from security to help open source management.
Disclaimer, like we're talking about regulation, but we're not actually lawyers. This is not legal advice. If you want to have that, please talk to your corporate legal counsel, not to us. If you need help talking to your legal counsel, you can talk to us. So why are we having this talk? You probably all know, or hopefully all know that. We are here, we're an open source conference. We know that your legal counsel doesn't know this. Your cybersecurity compliance department may know this, but this is not given. And this is a problem. Your procurement department doesn't even know what XKCD is. Like, they have never heard of this. And this is a problem when we're talking about regulation. Because we do regulate, we have a lot of regulation. This is how Europe works, and we're a regulated business. We're in the energy industry, we've been doing this for a long time, and people in our industry and our company think that they all know what they do. But as I said, some of this open source stuff is not well known. The reason we're having this talk is now is the time for you to get involved if you want to do this like we did. Because with the CRA and the NIS, there's now parts of your company that you may not even be aware of that think about regulating software, regulating open source software within your company, building compliance for that, building risk management. And the reason for that is because they're legally mandated to do this. Most of the stuff that they're now legally mandated to do stuff is stuff that if you've been in the software industry for the last 20 years, is common sense. Like ship updates, be able to ship updates, know your third-party software that you do, have risk management, have a catalog of your risks, written down. They have to do this now, but there's differences in what they have to do and what they think they have to do. And then there's a knowledge gap on, okay, we use open source. And that's a problem for a company.
Maybe also very interesting in many, also even regulated energy companies, it used to be the case that there's only parts of the company that actually tightly regulated, right? Where you have the BNetzA in Germany, the energy regulator come in and say, this part, energy distribution, whatever, you have to follow IT-Sicherheitskatalog. With NIS2, you have to look at the whole company, right? You can't just say also with the ISO certification, oh, we're just picking, 3 business units. You have to do the whole company. You don't have to do similar effort everywhere, but you should look at the whole company, and this makes this is a lot of work, basically.
And not only within your company, but with CRA and NIS2, also about your suppliers. You have to actually think about your suppliers and put them into your risk evaluation. And again, we're a regulated business. We've always done this. We know our drill. From our point of view, well, that's not really the case if we think about open source software. That's why we're having the talk. That's why we're talking about this. That's why he's consulting in the energy business on that, because there's some stuff that we think is missing in that. A common example is well-known, published by the curl maintainer. I think you all know curl, that C thing that basically does everything when you have to put something on the network, like internet network, not grid network. Just a few months ago, Daniel got an email by a big company from the US, like billion-dollar corporate company. Yeah, we found your software, please can you comply with that kind of regulation guideline, blah, 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 send us some of your information. We need to do this for our regulation guidelines. And he was like, I don't even have a contract with that company. Like, why are we even sending me an email? And that's the problem that we're talking about. Like, there's so much gap in between like your procurement department, your compliance department, and your software engineers that just pull stuff from the internet. There might be some problems in that new regulations. So it's good to get that into the mind of the people that work on that. But there's also a problem that like most of the people that think about compliance do not know open source, and there's distinct problems with open source in that compliance stuff. The open source software that you use and well, find on the internet, that your engineers find on the internet because they solve a problem for them, there is no contract. And most of the license have actually any kind of liability waivers. So no one is liable for the software if you use open source software. It's literally just a copyright license that gives you a right to just use it. This is something your procurement department is not aware of. I guarantee you. They don't know this. Most of them will think, yeah, well, we've got contracts with suppliers. That's all the software that we use. Maybe 50-50, if in a good case. But there's also problems with, like, in most of those cases, you can't get a contract because the software that you use is an actual community-based open source software, like in the Linux Foundation or just some bunch of hackers coming together and build stuff for their own need. And this is a problem that needs to be solved within your company. Like, they need to be aware of this because now you're legally mandated to think about this. And yeah, like, you could circumvent all that and not really have to think about it, open source stuff, for some of the legally mandated compliance regulation. Like, we too urge you to not go that path. Like, now is the time to think about risk, do a risk assessment. Big teams in your companies do that kind of risk assessment. Go to them, talk to them, say, well, we use open source software. Let's talk about open source risks as well, because we do it anyway now. So what could go wrong in using open source software? There's actual business continuity risk. Like, if you have products with just a single maintainer or a small project that can get, like, they can just go away. You don't have support. You need to be aware of that. And if your business depends on that kind of software, you need to be able to take over that software, develop that software. You have to be in a legal state where you can actually do this. Like, your legal department has to know about the license and stuff like this. Or like what we also had, like a bunch of those projects in the last years, tried to get like malware in, or like state actors tried to become maintainers, and we most of the time only found this out by accident, like we as a company. And then there's stuff like, again, some of those projects, there is no service contract, there's no procurement contract at all. All the risk stuff that most of the people do in your company is based on contracts with companies or contracts with other legal entities, not just a community that doesn't do contracts. And then there's like risk management stuff that your legal counsel thinks is a problem, like from the open source perspective that I'm, that I'm part of in my company also, and like in this community that we are. These are all solved problems. Like we can handle copyleft code. We handle CLAs, like the Linux Foundation has stuff like this. We know how to contribute. We know how to produce a Git commit with a DCO. Like we know that stuff. The legal counsel may not be aware of any of the words that I just said. And this is a problem. There's some easy steps to that, like get an OSPO like me, help those people, upskill your engineers, talk to them, make them aware of the open source software, keep track of your open source dependencies, and yeah, get contracts, look for foundations and stuff like this. But like this is just a list that I try to work with. What Hauke is going to present and what he's going to talk about is like, how do you actually take what's on that slide as a kind of systemic approach that you can take and talk to your compliance department too. Because if I go with that list to a compliance department, they just laugh and would say, yeah, okay, nice list. There's no risk. Like that's what you do. That's not what we do. But Hauke is going to tell you how you may be able to solve that kind of problem.
Yeah, thank you. So just very short context. I'm doing a lot of risk management from the information security side of things, right? And what is risk management? Well, in the first step, it's actually creating transparency about risks inside the company, right? Understanding where do we have exposure, where do we need to do stuff, how could it hurt our business, right? And then a second stage, you can go there and develop mitigation strategies, right? So what can we do, right? We can do a password policy so our passwords can't get easily hacked, right? Things like that in information security. This is a good approach, but of course, it is not enough to do this, or like with a traditional information security risk management, we don't solve the problems that Sebastian has been talking about. There's some technical reasons for that. Usually, when you have an information security management software, software is classified as a supporting asset, and the primary assets that you look at are information assets. So basically, you say, oh, I have a business process, and the business process needs data X, maybe customer data. And then you look at the customer data and say, how critical is it? Do we get fined if it gets leaked? Things like that. And then only the second view only is which software is involved there, but you don't assess the software as deeply, right? And the second, and Sebastian touched on this, the risk management often in a lot of companies is tied for liquidity to financial information or liquidity planning, and not really about understanding risks, right? If you want to delve into this, you can look at standards like ISO 31000 or BSI 203, right? We're not going to go into the detail of those, just as an idea for reading. How could it help OSS risk management, right? If you do this traditional risk management, you have a lot of categories of risks, right? And in information security, it could be something like this, right? You can do that yourself for your company, basically, right? But if you are, of course, you have, do I breach laws and regulation if I do this? In the energy world, you have the SAIDI, so like the disruption index, basically, how much time do people not have electricity at home? Things like that, business continuity. And we can take the idea of those categories and map them to open source, right? And this is not meant as a full list to just copy paste, right? But you can look at this and have some ideas how you could structure this to have like a more systematic approach. Sebastian talked about the single maintainer problem, right? So one thing you could do is say, okay, I'm using a software, open source software. How mature is the project, right? Is a project run by a foundation which has like a clear legal status, which has money for the foreseeable future, which has people working there full time doing stuff, just very professional? Or do I have like a self-employed single maintainer, or do I even have like just a guy or girl doing stuff, hacking away in the basement without any commercial interest, right? Doing just what they love, but having another job and so on. And so, of course, there are many projects like that, right? And so you could basically go there and then say, okay, I'm going to have a risk score here and see, of course, like if it's a well-structured foundation, it's least risk. If it's a single person, it's more risk, right? So you can go through this and score it. You can, of course, also assess where do you use open source software in your company, right? Do you use it just for very uncritical business administration processes, or do you actually use it in backend infrastructure, OT, energy management distribution, right? In regulated areas, then you should, of course, take a much closer look. And of course, licenses are a big topic with lots of risks associated to it. So here it's also, you should map out basically the licenses that are being used by the projects that you use, and also see, do they provide any risks to what I'm doing, right?
That's a question for your legal counsel, not for you, Chris. Like from my point of perspective, again, those are solved problems. For a legal counsel, that might be different. And the same with the other categories. Like, get in touch with them, talk to them, explain to them in what case you see risk and in what case you don't actually see risk. And this might be different. But this is a discussion that you have to make that kind of evaluation.
So you have one dimension of risk. And as I said, you can and you probably should look which categories are important for you in your business, right? These are just some examples or suggestions. And then you add a time dimension and say, how often do I run into problems relating to the software I use and to the stuff that we mentioned, right? And is it every 5 years? Is it once a year, once a month, once a week, right? So you just add this number. And then you can go and build a risk matrix, right? And you can do, you can do the risk matrix however you like. Every standard says, you should have a matrix, 3 by 3, 4 by 4, 5 by 5. Do it as you like, and how granular you need it. And then you can just place the software you use on the right area in the risk matrix. And then, of course, it helps you prioritize where you should invest the most energy to reduce the risk, right? And when you look at risk assessment, the first rule is always, because usually, even if you're not doing structured risk management, you will usually have some mechanisms in place to help you reduce risks, but it's not always clear and formulated. But in risk management, you always want to look at the worst case scenario, right? If it really all breaks, what would happen to the company? Could we survive, right? And then, only then you factor into account measures that you did, mitigations that you did, right? So for this kind of matrix, go with the worst case scenarios. Of course, what could be measures that are helpful here? Well, of course, you should build a rapport, or you should have relations, try to have relations with OSS maintainers that are important to your company, right? Maybe have support contracts with them and not just expect them to provide stuff for free, right? If you take them seriously, you will reduce your risk quite a lot. Of course, if you have the resources, if you have development resources inside the company, find a way to contribute to important projects, right? Of course, this can also have a lot of legal problems, right? Because of, legal in your company saying about, but if our employees provide code, why don't we have, rights? And so on. So you will have a lot of discussions, but of course it helps mitigate your risk. And that, of course, so I think a lot of stuff that people like Sebastian are doing, build internal capacity, generate understanding that open source, that community works different to your regular business, and then help fix code, understand code, fix bugs. And of course, and this conference is a good example, build strong alliances with other users and communities. So we talked a lot about different risks, right? The world is a dark and scary place. But you can do something. You can build transparency around risks. You can develop partnerships. You can contribute to make the world a better place. So be the change you want to see in the world. Yeah, thank you. And we are happy to take your questions.
Are there any questions? Yes.
Well, one very practical one, because I really like the tips that you've given and the lists that you've given, but I noticed that your slides aren't uploaded yet. So, and I really would like to use those as a reference, and it went by quite quickly.
Yeah, so just to recount the question for the stream recording, there was the remark that we didn't upload the slides yet. Yeah, we're going to do that. Okay. Sorry about that, we had some timing issues, but yeah. Anyone else? Like, we'll be around, just come to us, talk to us. Jonas.
Thank you for sharing. So I think write it down as a critique of this was also at our organization. So criteria to look at open source, and I really take away the risk aspect that you mentioned. So can improve on that. And the question I have is, I think it's a great step. What's the next step or the next roadmap you want to have?
So the question is, what could be next steps in that kind of risk stuff? Like, from my point of view, I'd love to have like that risk matrix things automated, but it's really hard. Like, there are some metrics where you, or some tooling where you could look for, okay, is this project maintained? Is it actively maintained? How many people do contribute? But there might be some risks that you as your company deem an open source risk that is not easily evaluated in any kind of automated way. Like, there is not some kind of metric that you can just put on source code. Most of those times that might be legal stuff or other stuff. And yeah, that would be my next step. Like, think about how that could be automated, or how you could, yeah, give some insights into your development teams that they are aware of that risk before they start using a certain component that you deem risky. Like, it doesn't help anyone if they build something for a year and then you burst in and say, yeah, well, that's too risky for us, you can't use it. Like, there's so much money and effort wasted, you don't want to do this. So that would be the next step. Like, think about how you can make that operational.
But I think it's also very important just to build the awareness inside the organization, right? You can talk about the mitigations, and that's very important. But really, for people, for many people, software is just software. Just they click on a button and it works, right? And I think that is something that we need to think much more about, and the regulation helps us think about this, and asks us to think about it, to ask, where does my software come from, which components does it have, is it open source, is it not open source, and what do we learn from that, right? And you will need to be able to reproduce this much more. And I worked recently on a project that was quite interesting, because we worked with startups in the energy sector, which are not NIS2 regulated, right? So they don't have to follow by the law rules and regulations. But they want to sell to the big companies their products in the energy space. And so now these big companies, they are asking nasty questions, right? Do you have an asset management? Do you know about your risks? Do you have rules and procedures for reporting vulnerabilities? Do you understand if stuff that you are using in your software is broken? When do you notice? How do you fix it? How fast can you fix it, right? And can you notify us so that we can notify the regulator that, all these kind of things. So it trickles down really to small companies, to startups, even though the regulation is only meant for the really big companies. And so if you start addressing these topics, I think you will be far ahead. And if you document what you're doing and what you're learning, without needing to undergo like ISO certification or things like that. That's bullshit for small companies, right? But be aware of these things and do small things and document them well. Then I think you're quite far ahead.
Question: is there not a website that will do these assessments for you, or why should we do it all with our developers? It's a lot of time.
No, I'd recommend you do this together with your developers and your engineers and like with that kind of part of your company. But like most of the people that do that kind of risk assessment and compliance stuff, at least it's our experience, don't do this with your engineering company. And our guess is like most of the people here are part of that kind of engineering, or at least in their mind space, part of that engineering still. Please talk to both. Like, go to your compliance department and ask them, hey, have you thought about open source risks? Like, are you aware of this? Do you ask people about if they...
There's not an official organization that rates a library, for example.
Well, there's tooling like the OpenSSF scorecard, which is for security, and they give you stuff for like, is it maintained, is it not maintained? There's some tools, I mentioned some in the slides. There's also the CLO monitor that's been maintained by the CNCF for the CNCF project and other stuff. But all of that depends on the risk evaluation of your company. Like, it doesn't make sense to have that huge risk catalog and huge metrics if they don't help you, because it's not deemed sensible for your company as a risk. Yeah, and like there's some tooling out there. There's unfortunately not that single place you can go to. Again, we're going to upload the slides. There's some tooling in there that I mentioned with the metrics and stuff. But yeah, again, we'll be around. We can talk about this. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the chaos metrics. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, everybody.